Okay, we are in the final parak of Sefer Daniel, parak Yud Bet, but we're still in the midst of the very same dream that we've been in for about 3 weeks already. It's a dream, if you recall, that Daniel sees that Gavriel is the one who is speaking, but Michael, the ultimate angel, archangel, appears, and he is the one who ultimately will fight the major battles on behalf of the Jewish people. So where we had left it off last week is we had begun to speak once again that these armies, whether they were the Romans, the Roman Empire, Christianity, Islam, or the Seleucid Greeks, whoever this enemy was, had planted their tent, the palatial tent, right up between Yerushalayim and the sea. And now in Pasuk Aleph of Perek Yud Bet, we continue ve'etahi, and at that moment. Now, what's the moment? The moment is the time of the ultimate end of days. Now, again, end of days, normally we think of as Messianic days. It could be also interpreted at the end of this period of time. So, but almost all the Mefarshim take it as the end of days, literally the Messianic era. All right. But as the Ibn Ezra says here also, this is still going back to actually Perek Zayin, to one of those last frightening dreams that Daniel had of, remember, of this animal with the multiple horns, and the one horn that was coming out, the small horn that was beginning to come. So it was going to be the time when God was going to judge that horn or that kingdom. Uve'etahi ya'amod Michael hasar hagadol ha'omed al bnei Amecha. And then Michael, the greatest of the angels, he is going to stand. Now, interestingly, in this case, Rashi explains this as stand in silence. Yishtokek. It's going to be quiet. And when it's standing, we also have the phrase of just standing and not speaking or doing anything. Michael is going to stand there. And at that point, Rashi says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be the one who is going to be judging the people. Vaita Eitzara. And it's going to be a time of troubles. Rashi says the time of troubles are not on the earth. The time of troubles are going to be in the heavens. But Pamalia Shal Mala, he's talking again, he's talking up above. It's going to be in the heavens. There's going to be this great battle in the heavens. We talked about the different angels representing the different nations, and they're going to battle it out. Michael obviously is going to succeed. However, the Reb Saadia Gaon explains, and what's this battle? This battle is the period of time that is the time of Armageddon, when we're talking about Chevlei Mashiach, that before the coming of Mashiach, there will be problems. Now, that could be one of the reasons why Jews have always believed Mashiach is coming any day, because we've always had problems. But the reality is there's going to be these kinds of problems. Says the Ibn Ezra, it's going to be the Eight Sarah that's going to be encompassing the entire world. It's a global trouble that they're going to encounter. Asher lo ne'ayta mihiyot goy ad ha'et hahi, which had never occurred anything like this until that moment. Uvaheit ahi yimalet amcha. But at that moment, in this troubled time, the Jewish people are going to be able to be escape. Kol hanimtza katuv b'sefer, and all of the Jewish people, the ones we're referring to are those who are written in the book. Now, the question is, which book? Is it the book of life is one possibility? Is it talking just about the tzaddikim v'yirei Hashem? Is it talking about as the Reed points out, all of the Jewish people are going to be saved? Yeah.
When you say Ya'amod, Ya'amod Michael, he's going to stand there. Ha'omed al bnei Amecha, who stands
over your people.
Over the people. Stands. You don't see any action here.
Right.
So he's standing here.
And that's why Rashi says, Yishtokek, he's not going to do anything. He's just standing there.
For what?
He is the representative. He is the symbol, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to act directly.
But I haven't looked ahead.
Yeah.
But is it going to be something more than
Well, we'll see. Yeah. Oh, we got more coming. There's a lot more coming. This chapter, this parak is an amazing parak, because this is one of the few places in all of Tanakh where we talk about Tchiyat HaMetim in a very explicit way, where we talk about a messianic era in an explicit way. This is a chapter that will see the role. But Michael, if you remember, just there is a hierarchy of angels. Gavriel is the one who's been talking all along. He's been the one of the dream. Michael has been the one who has swooped in, if you remember, at the beginning of this dream to resolve matters. But Michael is going to still be there present, and we're going to see two other malachim show up on the scene as well. This is all a dream. This isn't a prophecy. Remember, it's a dream. And because it's a dream, and because of those lack of proper nouns and the extensive use of pronouns, we have all of this room for interpretation. Basically, we don't know 100%, and you'll see even more why we don't know in just a few moments. V'rabim miyeshenei admat afar yakitzu. And many from those who are sleeping in the dust will arise. This is clearly a reference to Tchiyat HaMeitim. Now, the Rambam in his Mamar, yeah.
I'm sorry, but I didn't get the last part of Pasuk Aleph.
Kol hanimtza.
What is Ketubah
We don't know the Ketubah Sefer, the end of Pasuk Aleph. We're not 100% sure. There's a machloket what Ketubah Sefer is. The Ketubah Sefer could be those who are written, like we refer to as Ketubah Sefer HaChayim. Those who are the tzaddikim are going to be saved from among the Jewish people. It could be, the read says, the Jewish people in general, those who are in the subject of the book, are going to be saved, which are the Jewish people in general. So is it a specific book or the broader book? So V'rabim Yeshenei Afar, again, right then, this is the explicit reference to Tchiyat HaMeitim. We do have other references to Tchiyat HaMeitim, the vision of dry bones, but even then that may not be the Tchiyat HaMeitim that we talk about. There are other ways of explaining the vision of dry bones, but this clearly talks about it. The Rambam in his Ma'amar on Tchiyat HaMeitim, he says that this is the only place in all of the Tanakh where we have a clear reference to Tchiyat HaMeitim, and we'll see also the last pasuk of this parak will also refer to it. Yeah.
If this is just a dream, I'm not saying just a dream, then, it talks about Tchiyat HaMeitim, but it's not the same thing as it being in the book saying.
Right. So the classic question, it doesn't have clear, in other words, there isn't, why is it the Mashiach, the entire Messianic era, and Tchiyat HaMeitim, why aren't there explicit statements about them in the Torah? And why, if it's such a foundational principle of our faith, why doesn't it say it somewhere? Why do we leave it to Torah Sheba'al Peh? And that may be one of the reasons behind it, is because we want certain things to remain within Torah Sheba'al Peh. There were certain things that we didn't talk about, and there's a lot of things that are common that we don't talk about, and there are certain things that were just, it was understood, and it was a given, and people had this Masorah passed down. It could also be, and this is some of the other theories that are out there, that it wasn't a necessity to discuss it explicitly. Because one, when do you start talking about Messianic era? When do you start having these discussions? Is when Jews are in trouble. At the time of Galut, you start talking about these kinds of things because you need to give them hope. So you have to be explicit. It's going to end. It's going to be good. Everything is going to work out. Well, this is the book of Galut. We see this Galut. This is, Daniel starts at the beginning, right after the destruction. Actually before, but it's the destruction. We've seen Nebuchadnezzar playing his role and coming to the time of the rebuilding. So you have that same sense within these dreams, which is why it's being mentioned. But it is one of the great questions that's out there. Yeah.
So in this pasuk, sometimes we have a pasuk that can be interpreted this way or that way. This is like incontrovertible. Everybody agrees. We're talking about Tchiyat HaMeitim in this pasuk.
All of Chazal agree. Chazal agree. This is, in other words, there are modern perspectives. Yeah, there are other people will explain other things, but this is, the Rambam says it explicitly. This is Tchiyat HaMeitim. Right.
Okay, so then there was a possibility of Tchiyat HaMeitim by the Seleucid area, by the Seleucid era.
Well, the question is, when will Tchiyat HaMeitim come? First of all, there's a famous machloket. Does Tchiyat HaMeitim come with Mashiach? Does it come after the period of Mashiach? In other words, are we talking about sequential events? And we don't know. So, for example, the majority of Rishonim take the position that Tchiyat HaMeitim is part and parcel of what we call the Yemot HaMashiach. after the initial redemption that'll happen, then there's going to be Tchiyat HaMetim. There'll be the resurrection of the dead. Now, by the way, there's even a machloket of who's resurrected. Are the tzaddikim resurrected? Is everyone resurrected? We don't know. Okay, but we even have the machloket of, okay, resurrection of the dead will occur. Do they live eternally? The Rambam says no, because if it's part of the natural process of Yemot HaMashiach, the Rambam says Yemot HaMashiach, the world will continue to operate by the natural order. The difference will be that the nations of the world will accept God, not become Jews. We don't need any more Jews. We got plenty of Jews. We got enough sorrows with the Jews we have. Okay, but it's going to be El Shibud Malchuyot Bilvad. It's going to be that the nations of the world will accept that there is one God. There is a people called the Jewish people who are the Mamlechet Kohanim and the Goy Kadosh, and the rest of the world will be fine, upstanding non-Jews. Now, as a result, according to the Rambam, after Tchiyat HaMetim, the people who were resurrected will then die. Again.
If you're an Olam Haba, why would you want to come
Good.
back?
So that's, by the way, that's
I
part,
wanna stay in
right.
Olam
So
Haba.
but by the way, your point about if you're an Olam Haba, why do you want to have Tchiyat HaMetim? That's part of the whole discussion. In other words, who comes back? Are the ones who are coming back the people who are going to get more zchuyot? Or, for example, there's an opinion that says everyone, even the Rishonim, are going to have Tchiyat HaMetim, just so they can see their mistakes. So they suffer a little bit more. There's a machloket among Chazal, for example. My class, we were talking about this in my class at Ida Crown, and they were saying, wait a second, there's a reference to Gehenna in the Gemara, and I mentioned, I said, well, wait a second, but Gehenna is not an eternal damnation. It's not eternal damnation. Doesn't Gehenna mean the person within 12 months is purified of all of their sins, they've been punished, and then they get to go to Gan Eden? No, there's a machloket on that. There are some people who have eternal damnation, okay, do not have a place in Olam Haba. Are the people in Olam Haba, are the souls in Olam Haba necessarily going to come back? Are all of them going to come back or not? One of the beautiful things about things that we don't know about is the Chazal say we don't know for sure. But there are these various theories, all based on Mamarei Chazal and all based on Psukim that discuss it. The Rambam is pretty explicit and the Ramban is pretty explicit, and they disagree. And Naomi.
And how do they come back?
Oh, so what form do they come back? Do they come back when they were in their greatest of health, or that? We don't know. So part of that, part of those discussions are that they come back when they are in the purest form. Their neshama is also in a purer form, and their body reflects that as well. So there's a lot of questions on these matters, but the beauty is you can't argue with these words. Ela l'chaye olam, and they're going to be now. Chaye olam, interestingly, is chaye olam according to Mitzudot. He's taking the position their eternal life. However, chaye olam could also mean a life of this world, which means they're coming back into a physical form, which would open up the possibility for the Rambam, who says that Tchiyat HaMetim, people will be revived, and then people will die. Ve'ela l'charafot lidir'on olam, and others will arise, and this is where the idea comes from Rishaim also coming back, and they're going to suffer the cherpah. They're going to suffer the shame, watching how wrong they were. And as the Abarbanel says, they're going to see how successful the Jewish people are that they had oppressed and they had gone away from. Their own olam is another way of saying shame, according to the Mitzudot. Interestingly, according to the Miyuchas to Reb Sajagon, the commentary that is attributed to Reb Sajagon, what it means that they're on olam, it means they're going to go down to the lowest levels of Gehenna. Okay, just like heaven has different levels, Gehenna has different levels. V'hamaskilim yazhiru kizora harakia, and as Rashi says, those who were involved in Torah and mitzvot will shine like the firmament of the heavens, umatzdikei harabim kachochavim leolam haba, leolam va'ed. And those who cause righteousness are like stars in the world to come. Who are those who cause righteousness? The teachers. teachers are mentioned in particular. The Melamdim are mentioned in particular here. Stars, interestingly, are different than Zohar Rakia. Stars, if you remember, are always present, but you don't always see them. Okay, it's an interesting, you have all sorts of interesting drashot that you'll find in the Chazal about why the teachers of Torah are referred to as stars, and those who were the tzaddikim, the keepers of Torah, are referred to as the Zohar Harakia, the shining of the heavens. Va'ata Daniel, and now you, Daniel, Sitom Hadvarim V'chatom HaSefer Ad Eit Ketz. I want you to seal these words and or close these words and seal this book until the time of the end of days. Okay, even though, okay, you don't know a lot. In other words, Sudat David says, the little bit he understood, don't say anything to anybody. Okay, rather, you have to write them according to the Mitzvot David, write them in a way that is hidden until the time of the Kates. Now, based on this phrase, there is a famous article. It was actually originally a presentation by Rav Schwab, which I copied for you from his book, which is The Selected Speeches. One of my favorite books, because I told the story before with Rav Schwab. Rav Schwab answered an important shaila when we were putting up the Eruv here in Chicago. There was a shaila we had about whether or not, even though halachically we had all the backing on it, we're also aware that Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik was violently opposed to it. Or not violently is the wrong word. He was principally opposed to it, is a much better word. Some of his followers were violently opposed to it, but he was principally opposed to it. And he was already older and he wasn't well. And we had a shaila. Even though we had the halachic backing to do it from Gedolim, is it the right thing to do or not? If a Baron is not well, and would this cause him additional tsar? So Rabbi Cohn and I and Rabbi Weinkrantz, who were involved in putting up the Eruv, we called Rav Schwab. And the reason we called Rav Schwab was already in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk anymore. And he was much older. And he was a major posek, and he was also opposed to Eruvim. Opposed to an Eruv, to a community, an Eruv in a major metropolitan area. He was opposed to it. We felt this would be the perfect kind of person to speak with. And we called him, and Rav Schwab said, you can put up the Eruv. He said, I'm not telling you that the Eruv is right or wrong, but that concern should not be a concern in terms of putting up the Eruv. You can put up the Eruv. Okay, we move forward. Must have been about 6 months later or so, I saw Rav Schwab at a Torah Masorah convention. And I went over to Rav Schwab, and he had just come out with his book called Selected Speeches. And I purchased his book at the conference, and I asked him if he'd give me a bracha. I reintroduced myself. We talked about the Eruv. He remembered, give me a bracha. And, he said, yes, I'll give you a bracha. I said, would you write a bracha in the Sefer? So he writes in the Sefer, and I have the book at home, is where I copied it from. It says, Chazak v'amatz, Shin Shvab. Okay. I must have made a face when he did that. Because other times when people have written things in books, it's like, wow, lines and lines and all these beautiful brachos and things. And he looked at me and he just said, what? The bracha that Moshe gave to Yoshua is not good enough for you. So I'll never forget that encounter, because he put me in my place. 30 years ago, about 30 years ago. Yeah. So but in that book, the last chapter is this speech he had given, which had a number of iterations. And it's all based on this phrase, Ve'ata Daniel stom hadvarim v'chatom hasefer ad eit ketz. I want you to seal things. And what Rav Schwab does in this article, and I'm not going to go through the article in detail, but Rav Schwab presents the problem we have with Jewish chronology, that we are missing the 168 years, which we've talked about before, because we're missing a lot of the kings of Persia. And how do you begin to explain it? So if you turn to page 269.16 on it, for those of you who are online, if you give me just a moment, I will try to pull that file up while they're looking for it. Give me just a moment. Let's see if I can find it. I think I have it here. Nope. One more minute. It'll take me another minute. I apologize. Should have had it ready. I'm sorry. Nervous. One more second. I assume everyone who's online probably already pulled it up and, had printed it out and were looking at it. So I'm not that nervous. So here's the article, and on page 269.16. Okay. On the right-hand side of the page, if you notice, it says, in the course of our inquiry, we do indeed find a divine command conveyed by an angel to Daniel to seal the word and close the book at the end of a long prophecy, which begins in chapter 11:1 and ends at chapter 12:4 in Sefer Daniel. This strange vision predicting historical events concludes with a stern warning. V'ata Daniel stoma dvarim v'chatom hasefer ad eight kates. In writing his divinely inspired book, Daniel obeyed the heavenly command which explains the dark and obscure language of Sefer Daniel. Or it's the reason why Sefer Daniel is so hard to understand is because he was commanded to make it difficult. It also gives us a perfect right to assume certain historical events revealed to Daniel were omitted by him on purpose in faithful obedience to the divine command. It is equally safe to assume that our sages, who obviously had a thorough knowledge of the entire history of the Second Commonwealth, correspondingly eliminated in all chronological lists and pertinent discussion the same period which Daniel had to close and seal up. In other words, what Rav Schwab has a fascinating thesis. You see, there's that 165 to 168. There's a different ways of counting it, but there are years that are missing. The history doesn't work. We're off in our numbers. How is it possible that we're off in our numbers? So whereas some people take the approach, Chazal didn't know. They just didn't know. No one knew, and you can't blame Chazal. They weren't historians. They were teaching halacha. They were giving us Musar. They weren't historians. And other people say, no, Chazal are 100% right, and the historians are wrong. Rav Schwab presents his thesis based on this pasuk that actually Chazal knew, and they consciously, deliberately chose to mess it up, to lose those years based on this command that Daniel had of the 100 years. And he then goes on to prove how that's even possible. Okay, and yeah.
But it says stone v'chatom, I thought it's about, but not about missing years, but rather about the eighth case.
So that's what, so if I miss my years, if I'm off in my years, my calculations of when the Mashiach will come will always be off.
So this is a good example of.
In other words, if
coming up with
right,
time.
so if I go ahead and I say, let's say I pick, and we'll take the classic case, which Rav Schwab is going to talk about it. I pick the 6,000 year paradigm. Okay, that at the year 6,000, that the world is divided into 3 sets of 2,000 years. At the end of the 6,000th year, we're 5,782, Mashiach will come. And let's say out of that, let's say this year is really not 5782. Let's say this year, and we're just going to take, I'm going to take 168 to make it a little easier, which is one of the numbers it could be. 168 plus 5782, will someone help me? We're 59, we're about 40 some years off, right? We're about 50, okay? Let me just do it. 82, no, I just want to take a piece of paper and write it on, okay? So 0, okay, then we have this with 5. Yeah, we're at 50, we're at 5950, okay? Then really the year is 5950. And the Mashiach is really coming in 50 years. Okay. Now, if I take that 6,000 year paradigm, well, everybody else thinks, because I've lost those 168 years, everyone else thinks that I got a little bit of time. Okay. I have 218 years to Mashiach. And so I'm not going to go crazy right now. I got 218 years to go. It's a number of generations off. But all of a sudden, in 50 years, Mashiach shows up. Wow. Okay, so what happened is I never set up the people to anticipate Mashiach before he's scheduled to come. Rather, Mashiach is going to come earlier than they expect, even if they get the right calculation. Or according to Rav Schwab, that could explain what this pasuk means. And if you look in the next couple pages, page 270 and number 17, we're now faced with two questions. Suppose such a holy conspiracy had been divinely commanded, what would have been its reason? Why should we today be allowed to rend apart the veil of obscurity which was drawn in ancient days, hiding the chronological truth from our people? Okay, so he says that he explains what the advantages are of saying that this was conscious. He goes through all of the years, and then he actually has a chart of all of the years and where everything plays out. And if you notice on 279 at 3448, 168 hidden years begin. Okay, we stop counting Libriat Olam. Okay, which was also the year of what's called Minyan Shtarot. Okay, we stopped the change. The Minyan Shtarot is from when Alexander the Great came. Alexander the Great, if you remember, historically is before the rise of the before the rise of the Greek Empire. Okay, all of those things. The end of the hidden years is when Ptolemy conquers, and all of a sudden we get to the right time. Now, it works. Rav Schwab's theory is fascinating. Okay, but if you look on page 281, there's an epilogue because, and I'm going actually on 282, he says he printed this about 30 years earlier. This piece was from 1962, and he revised it a number of times. Okay, and then he had some questions about whether or not, writes, but in the meantime, many great doubts have bothered my mind that have made it mandatory for me to share my pangs of conscience with my readers. History is either true or false. Okay, and he goes down, and I'll let you all read this. Okay, but what he ultimately says at the end, okay, and if you look at G, we are now counting the year 5751. Okay, so this was written, 31 years ago. And if we add 168 years, the real date for this year would be 5919, which leaves only 81 years till the end of the 6th millennium. This is most frightening, especially for all those born not so long ago, or those to be born in the near future, who would become the living witness of the end of days. They will see their own eyes whether the statement that the world will exist only for 6,000 years and then be destroyed from the Gemara is meant to be taken literally or has a different interpretation, as do many Agadic pronouncements. I'm writing all this with awe and trepidation. On the other hand, if the hidden years never were, then mankind still is 250 years before the coming of the end. It is because of all these gnawing doubts that I've decided to put a big question mark after the words Jewish chronology. Let somebody with greater knowledge come and pick up the threads where I left off. Our traditional, universally accepted Jewish way of counting the years, the Briat Olam, is sacred territory which only fools do not fear to tread upon. This may be a disappointment to some, but on the other hand, I muster the courage to belong to those who rather wish to be honest to themselves than to be right. I would rather have a good question open than risk giving a wrong answer. And I follow the teaching of Shimon, who said, "Kishem shekibalti schar ala drisha, kach ekabel schar ala prisha." Just as I was rewarded for research, so shall I be awarded for the retraction. The historical material which I've assembled may still be somehow useful, even for those who will doubt whether there could ever be a Jewish chronology which would satisfy the non-believer in the wisdom of our sages. So I fall back into the ranks of all of Shlomei Amunei Yisrael. And to me, Libriat Olam means what it meant to our fathers. It is as simple as that. And while we may keep on searching for the answers, we pray that Hashem will enlighten us, our soul, our eyes. So in other words, what Rav Schwab does at the end of this essay, Rav Schwab presents in his essay a fascinating piece. I remember when I was in the yeshiva, we were taught Rav Schwab's theory on this, and it was taught with a certain sense of beauty to it because Rav Schwab was still holding by it. By the end of his life, Rav Schwab had some doubts about his own theory. And so as a result, he did.
Whether or not it was a deliberate concealment.
Whether a deliberate concealment, whether his proofs were good proofs, there were some other arguments. You'll see some of the arguments that came against them. So he somewhat retracted it. Now, he didn't retract it fully, because if he retracted it fully, he wouldn't have printed the article in total and then printed the epilogue. He would have just, put out a word. I disagree with what I said earlier. I made a mistake. But he kept the question mark there. But my point of bringing it up today is it solves it's still, his theory does solve a couple of problems, but more importantly, it references this pasuk that we have. When we look at Sefer Daniel, we've been talking about all these pronouns that create all this confusion. It was, according to the way Chazal understand it, it was deliberate. Daniel could have just as easily said who he was talking about. Okay, maybe according to this, Daniel may have known this. It may have been somewhat, the Mitzvot David says that he didn't know everything. There was a lot of stuff he still didn't understand about the dreams, but he could have been more explicit about those dreams, about what he thought they meant. He deliberately, according to this pasuk, he was commanded to deliberately hide pieces. Yeah.
So according to this theory, correct me please if
Yeah.
I'm wrong. There is an actual finite number for the end of days, for Yemot HaMashiach, for Tchiyat HaMetim. There is actually there. It is not dependent upon Maaseh Bnei Adam.
Well, so
It's dependent upon the fixed year.
no, so we have another Gemara that talks about Be'ito Achishana. Okay,
But so Star Dvarim, it covered the year up, means that the year could change.
the year could be earlier. We've said that elsewhere in the Gemara. That time of Chizkiyahu could have been Mashiach still. Okay, so we see, the Mashiach could have been, already in the time of Bayit Rishon.
So Star Dvarim does not necessarily, I'm
Star-
sorry, I'm interrupting
yeah.
all the time. But Star Dvarim does not mean conceal the year, the date. It means conceal what makes it happen.
Conceal what with the information you have been given about the end of days, about the future of Klal Yisrael. Now, part of that future could be, and again, Rav Schwab doesn't say definitively because he even phrases it beautifully. There are three different Gemaras that talk about the 6,000 year concept. But he also says there may just be Agadic material that requires requires a different interpretation than the way we've been taking it. One of the great problems of this generation is that we have reduced the Medrash and the Agada to being storybooks. There's somewhere in here we used to have it also. There's a series called The Little Medrash Says.
And the big Medrash says.
There's the Medrash Says. Yeah, the Medrash says,
There are many
by the way,
Arabic-
and the Medrash says has an agenda, by the way. It's a very strong, if you look in Bamidbar, it's very strong anti-Zionist. It's got footnotes against the state of Israel and things, very strong messages there. And then the Little Medrash said was to make accessible to little kids. Now, it's one thing, when I was growing up, we had the Golden Book of Bible stories. We knew it wasn't Jewish, but it was cute little stories. Okay. Here, the Medrash says, what we do is we reduce, people learn the Medrash says to be Mavi the Sedra. There's a wonderful book. I think it's called Let My People Go, which are all the Midrashim about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Really wonderful, but they weren't meant, Midrashim weren't meant always to be taken literally. Some Midrashim are meant to be taken literally. Some are meant to be studied and to try to figure out what the Midrash is really saying. What's the point in the Pasuk? How do Chazal build off of it? What we've done is we've taken Midrashim and we've diminished them. And we've made them into just simple storybooks. Now, with that, what Rav Schwab is trying to say here, and it's not a chiddush, but he says it explicitly, that look, we have this date, and the date may be real or may not be. And the challenge that'll come when that date arrives is because it's so well known, because it is explicit in a Gemara, is that people will find out, was that Medrash meant to be taken literally, or did it have some other meaning? And if we take it with absolute certainty that 6,000 is the date, then we're going to have absolute disappointment. And whenever the Jews were disappointed about the coming of Mashiach, it led to disillusionment. We didn't blame ourselves, we blamed our beliefs, and we blamed God. So there are dangers and risks, and that again could be part of the reason of why Gavriel conveys this to, Gavriel is the one telling the dream. Gavriel is in the dream that he tells Daniel, keep it quiet. You don't know, even though you don't know everything, listen, you don't know everything that you saw, you don't understand it all, even what you understood, make it obscure, keep it closed, and do it in such a fashion. Rav Schwab applies that to the 168. years. So that piece of the Persian era, that this was part of the explanation of why we don't have those years in our chronology. And again, we see it, we know two dates, 586, everyone knows BCE is the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, 70 CE is the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. We know that the Beit HaMikdash lasted about 400 years. The only problem is when you add 586 and 70, you find out that that's for second Beit HaMikdash would have been 650 years. No one, for some reason, people don't think about that. And the reason is because we're missing that 168 years. So really, Chazal's number were correct of how long the Beit HaMikdash stood. The chronology is where the challenge arises. He has an explanation. We spent a lot of time on it, probably more time than it would take you to read the article, but it's kedai to read his article because Rav Schwab was outstanding in so many ways, in so many things, and this article is an important piece. The pasuk continues. We've made it up to pasuk Dalet, and we're already at 9:40 in the morning. Yeshota to Rabim v'tirbeh hadat. That at that point, the knowledge, people will try to find things out, and the knowledge will increase. V'ra'iti ani Daniel, and he says, I saw, and Daniel says, I saw, v'hinei shnayim achirim omdim. There were two other beings who were standing there. Michael's floating. And they were on both sides of the Tigris River. There were two other, let's take for a moment, there were two malachim. That's how the Ibn Ezra explains it. They were standing, one on each side. Okay?
Unnamed angels.
Unnamed. Vayomer la'ish lavush begadim. Okay, habadim, I'm sorry. And I said to the one who was dressed in the fine linen, that's Michael, okay, the ultimate angel, Asher mimalim emeha yor. He's floating above the water. Okay. Ad matai ketz haplaot. When is going to be the time of the end of those things that are wondrous, or as Mitzudat Zion says, the time that is hidden? The thing, it's for something to be wondrous, it's you don't see it, right? So when will this time come? Veshma ta'ish lavush habadim, and I hear this person who is dressed in these white linen clothing, which was the way we had described Michael in the past. Asher mimal lemeha or who was above the river. Vayarem yemino usmolo el hashamayim, and he lifted both hands up to the heavens. Now, interestingly, normally when you lift a hand up, lifting up a hand is normally an oath. You lift up two hands. Interesting. And he swore on the one who brings life to this world, and he swore in the name of God. It's going to be 1, 2.5 times. That's what it's going to happen. Ukechalot napetz yad am kodesh tichlena kol ela. And at the time, all of these people are going to shatter, are going to be destroyed. War is, as Rashi says, that when the Yad Yisrael is going to be ended, then the Gula will come. The Abarbanel says, no, this is talking about all the others who are against the Jewish people when they are destroyed. Now, the 1, 2.5. What's 1, 2.5? Well, back in Perek Zion, when we had this same terminology, it just was in Aramaic, Ad Idan ve'edanin, it was Zion Chav Hey. We had this before, Peleg Idan, and a half of a time frame. There we talked about that it was going to be the time from Yetziat Mitzrayim until the first Beit HaMikdash, which is 480 years. And then it was going to be another 410 years until the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And then half of 890, the 410 and the 480 together is 1336. That's the 1,336 years. That's the amount of time of Mashiach. That's the way Rashi had explained it there. And if you remember there, we had a lot of other ways of explaining it. Maybe it was talking about hours. We don't know for sure. Yeah.
So they just told Daniel, don't write anything down, don't tell anything, and then he comes back and he asks questions he's not supposed to tell anybody about.
Yeah, but he's allowed to know. No, he wasn't allowed to not know, but he was allowed to know. Then, Vani Shamati V'lo Avin. Says Daniel, but I didn't understand what was told to me. V'omra Adoni ma acharit eile. And I said to this person who was in this white linen garments, I spoke to the Malach who was speaking to me, ma acharit eile. He didn't understand the calculation that was given to him. And so he wanted the Malach to explain to him, what does it mean? As Rashi says, I didn't know, what does he mean when he says Moed Moadim? Vayomer, lech Daniel. Okay, the Malach says to Daniel, goodbye. I'm not going to explain to you anything. I'm not going to explain you anything more. Okay, lech l'darkecha v'al tishal yoter, says the Ibn Ezra. Ki stumim v'chatumim hadvarim ad eight kates. All of these things are unknown and are closed off until the time of Mashiach. The very same words, if you notice, that were used to him in Pasuk Daled. Stom hadvarim v'chatom hasefer. Stumim v'chatumim. Vayit bararu. Vayit labnu, vayit sarfu rabin. Okay, but regarding these days, this calculation, Rashi explains these things will be understood, to be clarified, and to be barur is well. How does he translate yit labnu? I want to say yit labnu should be clarified. What? Elucidate, I like elucidated and clarified. Yitlabnu, when something is white, it means it's clean, it's clear. Okay. So that yeah, well, it's understood because you can see right through it. It's like we say the phrase in English, like clear as day. Okay. This phrase, Yitlabnu, is the same kind of idea. When something is lavan, it's not that it's white, it's just, it's there, you can see it. Or you might even say in English, it's not the same black and white, where you really see it clearly. Vayitzarvu rabim. And there are going to be at that point, okay, many people will understand, they will be purified, the people, to understand what is going on. Interestingly, the Malbim says this isn't talking about the Jews, this is talking about the non-Jews. Are going to get it at that point. But when it comes to those who are Rishaim, they won't do it, and they will continue to be their evil ways. But the people who understand will understand. And from the time the Korban Tamid was taken away until, okay, this time will be 1,290. Now the problem is 1,290. We just said that the amount of days were going to be 1335. So I'm missing 45 years. And exactly where those 45 years occur and how they change, we're not really sure. Because as the Dat Mikra talks about, there are actually three different numbers that we've now been given for when the Kates is going to be. In Perek Chet, it was 2,300 years. In Perek Yud Bet and in Perek Zayin, it was 1,335. Now it's 1,290. Okay. Interestingly, the Dat Mikra says he's still hanging on to the idea. This is all talking about Antiochus. He says this isn't years, this is days. So if you figure out 1,290, it's about 3 years, etc. Rashi says that actually 6 years, we remember, before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, was the time when the Korban Tamid was ended. You add that means that's 64 CE. You add 1290 to it. According to Rashi, Mashiach should have come in 1354. Now, interestingly, what happens here is we don't know. We really don't understand where these years are, what these differences are, why there's 45 years difference. Rashi says that it's going to be the 45 years as Mashiach is going to come in two times. He's going to come first, and then 45 years he'll be hidden from view, and then he will return. Not a second coming, but he will return. He'll be mechuseh. There are others who want to suggest that the first coming, the 1290, is Mashiach ben Yosef, and the 1335 is going to be Mashiach ben David. we don't know exactly what it is. We know there's a difference in the years. V'yagia leyamim 1335, and he'll come. Okay, I'm sorry. Ashrei hamechakem. Okay, praise be the one who waits. Okay, meaning waits in this case, Rashi says, well, I gave you 1290, I gave you 1335, so 1290. Praise be the one who's waiting. V'yagia, and he'll come liyamim 1335. He'll come at 1335. Vata, but you, Daniel, lech laketz, you go, okay, levet olamecha, you're going to die, v'tanuach v'tamod legoralcha leketz hayamim. But you will be revived after you have passed away. You're going to be brought back into the living at the end of the days. This is actually a phrase which is said at the end of Levias. Okay, you're going to arise at the end of the time. And this, the Rambam says, is the second time where this only second source for Tchiyat HaMeitim. The first was earlier in the parak, and this one is V'tanuach v'tamod legoralcha l'ketz hayamim. You're going to come up again. Now, interestingly, the Malbim points out that if you take those words together, it was supposed to be Tov Reish Chof Chet, according to the Malbim. Tov Reish Chof Chet is 1868, okay, which he then felt would be 335 more years until the Ketz Hayamim, until Tchiyat HaMeitim. But the Malbim passed away, he saw 1868, he passed away in 1879. So he saw he was wrong on his cheshbon on that as well. But with this, we finished Sefer Daniel. So when you have Sefer Daniel, what you really have is this fascinating book that spans all of the Babylonian Empire, all the way into he lived into the rise, the early period of the Persian Empire. Definitely his prophecies, not his prophecies, his dreams discuss the Hasmonean Empire. And according to most of Chazal, also discuss the ultimate time of Tchiyat HaMeitim, all of Jewish history. He rose from being, one of the people who was a captive to being one of the most trusted of all the advisors. He was a person who conveyed dreams, though, and he didn't always understand what he conveyed. And the little bit that he conveyed at the end of his life, he had to leave in a mysterious form. And that's Sefer Daniel. Next week, we'll pick up with Megillat Esther. And please God, there's some new archaeological books that are out on Megillat Esther, which make it also more interesting as well. And everyone should have a wonderful day.
Rabbi Matenki, why give dates? They're not just talking general.